Hello and welcome. I'm Fahd Husain. This is a very important week. American President Donald Trump heads to China. Pakistan continues its mediation between USA and Iran, and the peace proposal stands, we don't know where. We'll do a deep dive today. So here's where the situation is. Of course, this is the week that President Donald Trump is traveling to China for a very important visit that has already been delayed once. It was expected he would have wrapped up the war in Iran, on Iran, by the time he landed in Beijing, but that doesn't seem to be happening now. How would that make negotiations a bit more difficult for the American president, and where is this war going now? To discuss all of this, I'm joined by a very special guest from USA. Mr. George Beebe is the Director of Grand Strategy at the Quincy Institute. He has also spent more than 2 decades in government as an intelligence analyst, diplomat and policy advisor, and has also served as staff advisor on Russia matters to former US Vice President Dick Cheney, as well as director of the CIA's Russia analysis. Thank you so much, Mr. B, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So as we enter the week where the American president is traveling to China, the Iran war doesn't seem to be going in any direction that would be very favorable to the US. So first of all, do you think it's going to make negotiation a bit difficult for the American president when he sits across the table with his Chinese counterpart?
Well, sure, I think it will. These types of summits are determined in part by the personal interactions between these state leaders, but also the perceptions of power. And right now, I think the perception in the United States and in the world is that the United States is losing power, losing influence overall, in part because it is in a stalemate with Iran over this war, has been unable to open the Strait of Hormuz, which prior to these military operations was operating freely. And I think there's concern in the United States that President Trump is going to be facing some sort of setback in November at the midterm elections, which at this point don't look like they're going to go particularly well for the Republican Party. So he's entering into this summit, I think, in a situation where the perception is that the United States is growing weaker and President Trump is probably growing weaker as well. And that hurts his leverage in these talks.
And this perception that you are referring to, and I would tend to agree with you, obviously this perception is also in many ways defining the position of the Iranians when it comes to negotiations. You know, they've sent a proposal, a fresh proposal through Pakistan to President Trump, to which he has reacted very negatively, saying that I don't like it at all. But I think the Iranians are probably also reading this perception that you are referring to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think they believe that time is on their side, that President Trump needs a deal more than they do, and that they can outlast him because they can ensure that world oil prices remain high or go even higher. And that is a real form of over Trump. When those prices go up, every American sees that. They see the prices at the gas pumps every time they fill their cars. And so that's a concern for Trump, and I think it means that the Iranians feel that they have a lot of leverage in these negotiations. That said, I think the Iranians are showing some signs of greater flexibility. They've not gone all the way to the point that President Trump is happy with what they're proposing. But I think there are some signs of flexibility, which means I don't think these negotiations are destined to fail.
I think, Mr. Beebe, you know, I want to draw upon your wide experience in the government. You know, you worked with the Vice President also. You also worked at the CIA's Russia analysis. So that gives you, you know, the kind of deeper understanding of how the US government works. What I'm trying to allude to is whether the kind of perceptions that you were talking about, does it filter into the inner sanctum of American leadership? For example, I'm sure you also read this article by Mr. Robert Kagan, which is doing rounds on digital media, where someone like him also is now saying that the Americans have lost and the Iranians have won. So, do you think that this kind of feedback is being given to people in the White House, in Pentagon, or are they stuck in their own loop and kind of oblivious to, you know, the general perception about where their war is going?
Well, I think there's no question that people at the White House at senior levels of our government are reading all the same things that everyone else in the government is reading and which you just alluded to. They, I think, keep a very close watch on what people are saying in the media, what popular opinion is at any given time. They have to weigh all of their options as they approach issues like Iran, with an eye to the politics that attend this here in the United States. Politics is about the pursuit of and the exercise of power. And so as they exercise power, they have to look at what kind of impact that might be having on future political prospects. So they're watching this, I think, very closely. And people in lower levels of government are watching this too. They're trying to figure out how much clout President Trump has at any given time. So these are all, you know, very, very political issues, and perception matters a lot.
Absolutely right. Perception will play a major role in the midterm elections that you're talking about. But even if we talk of perceptions, I'm sure that the way that the government machinery works, the president and his staff would be presented with a lot of options and scenarios, best, second best, worst options. And I assume that most of those options being presented to him by responsible agencies like the CIA, like the Pentagon, would be based on hard-nosed, realistic, fact-based analysis, not like politically tainted analysis. So with those kinds of, that kind of input being given to the top decision makers, don't you think a lot of that analysis will be saying that the least worst option would be to strike a deal?
Well, I think the way this tends to work is that the intelligence agencies, the CIA, will make assessments about the capabilities and intentions of various foreign actors, how they might respond to various scenarios, so that the president has a good understanding of what other countries are going to be doing and how they see things. The Pentagon is going to be offering him assessments of what it can do in various scenarios and the risks involved from a military point of view, so that President Trump has a very good understanding of our military capabilities and options. But then on top of that, there are political calculations. And that doesn't get done by the Pentagon or CIA. That's something that's done in the White House by the administration itself. They're the ones that ultimately look at these different options and scenarios and assess the kinds of political risks and opportunities that they have in all of this. So it's a complex process.
And having experienced this complex process, what is your sense now? You're there, right there, within the parameter of where all decision making is being done. What is the sense that you're getting from inside the Beltway, from the think tank community, from the analysts, from government officials, from former government officials? What is the sense of where this war is going, and what should President Trump do?
Well, I don't think the president has very many good military options. To compel Iran to accept the kinds of terms that President Trump would like, an unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, complete end to any kind of uranium enrichment, for example. Those things are not easy to compel militarily. Iran has a lot of options to resist capitulation on those areas. So what I think this means is the president has to try to find a way to compromise. He's not going to get everything he wants. So what's going on right now, I think, is he's wrestling with just how advantageous a compromise can he get, and what kind of price is he going to have to pay to get the things that he needs. And I think the White House is working very hard on trying to find a compromise deal with Iran. I think they are getting closer. It's a very difficult negotiation, in part because the Iranians have some real leverage in all of this. But there are reasons why Iran would want a deal too. I think probably the biggest one is they like the end of sanctions. And if Trump is willing to lift all sanctions on Iran, then I think he could probably get the kind of deal on the Strait of Hormuz and on the nuclear issue that he could call progress.
I agree with you, Mr. Beeb. I think the Iranians also know that they have a sweet spot, and they can also miss the moment, and then they may not get the kind of deal that they are getting now. So I think, yes, I agree with you. I think it's both sides need to really recognize the moment and find the best possible off-ramp. And I think the Chinese trip will be important in that sense also. I'm sure that you also know, Mr. Beeb, that Pakistan and China have very close relationship. And currently the Pakistani leadership also has direct access to President Trump. The mediation that is being done through Pakistan, I am sure that the Chinese leadership is in the loop. And when the two presidents meet, the Chinese and the American, in Beijing this week, I'm sure that the Pakistani leadership would have briefed the Chinese leadership also. So I think this would be a good opportunity for the Chinese to weigh in. They've already been speaking to the Iranians and probably pushing them, influencing them. Do you think President Trump would be open to listening to President Xi and might be influenced from that perspective?
I think he would be, yes. I think the president would appreciate Chinese help, but in a discreet way. The more publicly it appears that China is involved, the more President Trump will be concerned that he's looking to the Chinese to bail him out of this problem that he's gotten into with Iran. He doesn't want that optic politically. But if the Chinese are willing to work quietly behind the scenes, as I think they're doing right now, to urge the Iranians to compromise, to end this conflict, I think he would indeed appreciate that, and that would help the broader U.S.-Chinese relationship.
And now bring in Russia. This is your area of expertise. You've also advised the former Vice President Cheney on Russian matters. Obviously, President Vladimir Putin is watching this very closely and drawing lessons for his war in Ukraine. Probably he is feeling satisfied that the Americans are bogged down in Iran. At this stage, when President Trump would be in Beijing and knowing the close coordination between China and Russia, what would be Russia's role in all of this at this point in time?
Well, I think President Putin wants a couple of things. I think the biggest thing he wants is an end to the war that in turn allows him to normalize relationships with the United States, lift economic sanctions or at least ease them, and get a lot more room for geopolitical movement for Russia in its foreign policy. Right now, because of the Ukraine war, Russia has become very dependent on China, and I think it wants a more balanced ability to talk to both the West and the East. That gives Russia maximum room for maneuver in the world. I also think he doesn't want to see President Trump fail in Iran. And the reason for that is he's got a window of opportunity, I think, with President Trump to end the war in Ukraine and get these sanctions, get U.S.-Russian relations normalized. Probably President Putin worries that if he doesn't get this done soon, President Trump will be politically marginalized in the United States if the midterms don't go well, and that window of opportunity might close. So I think from President Putin's point of view, he wants to help the Americans end the war in Iran. He has renewed the offer that the Russians have made to take enriched uranium and store it in Russia. That was a role that they had played for the JCPOA, and I think they've indicated several times, including just over a week ago, that they're willing to play that kind of role again today. So I think he wants to be constructive on Iran and hope that momentum in ending the war in the Persian Gulf can carry over into a compromised settlement of the war in Ukraine.
Makes sense. And finally, Mr. Beebe, on the topic, but slightly off topic, do you think NATO is dead or can it survive?
Well, I think NATO is in a very precarious position right now. The world has changed quite dramatically. We're no longer in the unipolar period of American hegemony. We're in a much more multipolar order, and China is by far the biggest challenge that the United States faces geopolitically. And I think that means that our relationship with our European allies in NATO is going to have to change. And the value of NATO is much different for the United States in this emerging multipolar world. Now, that doesn't mean that NATO will necessarily die, but I think the roles that it plays and the relationships between the United States and its allies are going to have to change quite dramatically. It will either evolve in an orderly direction toward a rebalanced relationship and a new purpose for NATO, or it will, I think, deteriorate in a hostile and disorderly way. And that's going to depend a lot on how events unfold with Iran, for example, and with President Trump's own presidential fortunes here in Washington.
Which is why this is such a crucial week, and I think a lot can happen in the next couple of days. Mr. George Beebe, indeed a pleasure having you with us and sharing your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tonight, Pakistan finds itself standing between two very different realities. On one side, there was celebration in Islamabad on Sunday as the country marked 1 year of Marka-e-Haq, the battle that led to victory over India. The ceremony carried all the weight of a major national moment. Senior military leadership was present, political leaders attended, families of martyrs were honored, and the message coming from the stage was very clear. Pakistan believes it proved its strength at a critical moment in the region's history. Field Marshal Asim Munir spoke about unity, sacrifice, preparedness, and the need for Pakistan to remain strong in what he described as an increasingly dangerous regional environment. But there was another message in that event as well, that Pakistan today is trying to move beyond simply reacting to crises. It is trying to shape events around it. Because while the ceremony was taking place in Islamabad, Pakistan was also deeply engaged in efforts to move forward negotiations between the US and Iran. Diplomatic contacts continued through the weekend, and officials are hopeful that more progress can still be made. So that is one side of the story tonight. Pakistan projecting confidence, military capability, and diplomatic relevance. But then comes the other reality, the harsh one, the painful one, the terrorist attack in Bannu. At least 15 policemen were martyred in one of the deadliest attacks in recent months. A reminder that even while Pakistan is trying to help manage tensions in the wider region, it is still fighting a brutal war at home against terrorism. And this is where the challenge becomes far more complicated for the Pakistani state. In February, after a series of major attacks on Islamabad, Bajaur and Bannu, Pakistan launched large-scale strikes against terrorist camps and hideouts inside Afghanistan. It confirmed that scores of militants were killed in those operations, and the message was direct. If these groups continue to operate from across the border, Pakistan will act. Inside Pakistan itself, anti-terrorism operations have also intensified in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, with security forces targeting suicide networks, terrorist leaders, and logistical infrastructure linked to attacks on Pakistani forces and civilians. And that brings us to the difficult balancing act Pakistan faces tonight. On one side, Islamabad is trying to help prevent a wider war between the US and Iran at a moment when the entire global economy is nervous about what happens next in the Gulf. On the other, Pakistan is still in a fight against terrorism. So the picture of Pakistan today is not a simple one. We are expanding our diplomatic role on the world stage while still grappling with terrorism coming out of Afghanistan. So what is the best course of action for us now? Now let's go deeper and try and understand where this threat is coming from, what can be done, and what are the options that Pakistan has to combat and defeat terrorism. And to understand this with the help of maps and data, I am joined here in the studio by Mr. Iftikhar Firdaus, one of the most well-known journalists, commentators and analysts on all matters related to counter-terrorism and terrorism. Iftikhar, welcome to the show. So now I want you to help us understand, if we can start with the first map. You know, we've just had this horrible attack in Bannu, and we had started anti-terror operations inside Afghanistan in February. They went on for a bit. We hit them, had terror camps pretty hard. But then now it's come back. So we need to figure out how serious this issue is. So first of all, you know, looking at this map here, if you can just quickly explain to us the real threat that is coming into Pakistan from Afghanistan, given this huge border that we have. So what are the concentrated areas from where this terrorism is coming?
Thank you very much, Fahd Saab, for this explanation in terms of where this trajectory is headed so far. So to be very quick, it's basically concentrated in the south of KP.
Okay.
This is the area where actually the major bulk of the attacks is taking place. South of KP can roughly be divided into 3 divisions. It's the Kuhat division, it's the Bannu division, and the D.I. Khan division. Traditionally the abode of the Taliban and all sort of non-state actors. Because both the Waziristans are actually in here, and this is an area which actually directly corresponds to Afghanistan as well.
Right.
So even the attack that you recently mentioning is actually within Bannu city, within the Bannu division. And then the second part of it is actually in Balochistan.
Right.
And you can see this is where Kandahar obviously, for the good or the bad reasons, is on the global map for several reasons. And it's the leadership of the Afghan Taliban that's based over here. This is also the border area. After 2021, we've seen traffic navigating, the bulk of it actually being on the Chaman border. So you've got the Torkham border there. You've got 6 border crossings on in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. You've got at least 2 with Afghanistan on this border. And so we've seen attacks concentrating over here. The Pakistani state, its intelligence tentacles clearly tell us that all of it has been orchestrated from Afghanistan. And so the Taliban actually, one of the reasons that they're using now, it's not the Taliban that we knew originally in the 90s. They're mixing sentiments with nationalism, with their own brand of Islam, their own implementation. And so they're actually using border conflict to intensify attacks in Pakistan.
So the infiltration that comes from this side on into Balochistan and from this side into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in the form of what we call tashkils.
Yes.
Is it the same kind of routes that they follow, same kinds of groupings, this sort of similarity between infiltration of terrorism from here in Balochistan and KP?
So this is interesting when you mention the concept of tashkils, because we've seen the tashkils grow larger in number, which actually means that the Afghan Taliban have no shortage of manpower. So they are getting recruits from all around, number one. But the second thing that you're asking in terms of the border conflict is actually not familiarized routes that they are using now. Okay. And a lot of people actually thought that the fencing that we have on the border would stop these kind of attacks. but the kind of concentration, because every system that is built is actually built to deal with a certain level of concentrated threat. The number of people that are actually crossing is actually becoming a larger problem. And hence the blame on the Taliban, because they are the one who are providing fodder for this war.
And we will show that data also, and of course, you mentioned the fence. We have probably one of the longest fences in border. I think it starts all the way from here, goes through the border, and also with Iran, so it goes all the way here.
Absolutely.
One of the longest fences, and yet, it is being breached. Now, let's go to the next map, which is a heat map.
Yeah.
So this basically tells you where terrorism is being concentrated. So help us understand how this works.
So this, what we see is actually the tribal areas, the ex-tribal areas, which are now part of KP, but also the south of KP. And so when you see this larger number on where actually these attacks are concentrated,
right,
when you put when you analyze and crunch the data cumulatively, you'll see that majority of these districts are actually in the south of KP.
Right.
And the south of KP is one of those areas, as I said, it's the lowest on the developmental index as well. Plus the population over here is scattered.
Just to add to our viewers' understanding, of course, we're talking about terrorist attacks in 2025. There is also some data for 26, but we just want the consolidated data here. And the red shows you where the real concentration of attacks are. 413 in KP, and then here it's Balochistan 254. So why this area?
So this area is basically what we're talking about, as you mentioned in terms of statistics. Right. So you've got Waziristan, Diyai Khan, Lucky Marwat, Banu, and then Khyber. And so all of these are traditionally considered to be areas. In Khyber, there is a problem, because when I say south of KP, the attacks are majority concentrated in the south of KP. But in Khyber, one of the major reasons is that the fence over here is at such a height that it's difficult to maintain and repair every year. So there's an open patch over here of about roughly 53 kilometers, which has been consistently used to carry out attacks inside Pakistan. And so that's one of the major reasons. It's also a traditional transit route that has been used in this part. But in the peripheral areas to the tribal areas, what we've seen is most of those people who were fighting along the Taliban for all those years, they've actually now come back. They've been sent back. I won't say come back.
Sent back.
They've been sent back.
With a very specific agenda.
Yes, with a very specific agenda, because all the communication that you tap into and for all the propaganda material when you analyze, these are known people who have fought along with the Taliban. So they're not unknown entities, and they've been sent back. But in this part, our problems are comparatively different. And so you see a more jihadist mindset over there, but over here you see a very different proxy war game being played. And this is also related to Afghanistan. And if we go into the detail on the Balochistan border, what we've seen is that they've actually joined hands with these. So it's the Taliban, their proxies within Pakistan, and the Baloch.
And there's close coordination.
There is an extremely close coordination. In the beginning of 2021, we saw propaganda emanating from Islamist groups in Baloch language. And we thought maybe it's just a coincidence. And then slowly and gradually we saw them announcing their chapters in this area. And now there's actually in 2024 and 25, there's an open confession saying that we do have a coordination.
So that makes it even more dangerous.
Yes.
And the fact that they have refuge here in this area where they cross over, they are provided refuge, sanctuary, they have their camps, they get their weapons,
absolutely,
they get their training, and then they come back and do terrorism.
So this is where it becomes even more complicated in this part, because this is an area which also borders Iran.
Right.
And you know the situation with Iran. This program is about Afghanistan, but it's the major hot topic at this point on the escalating violence in Iran. But it also becomes a zone because Iran is under sanctions. And so for major trafficking, not just narcotics, but other sort of edible items, as well as several issues related to which can be exported, imported, also for human trafficking. And so this area becomes a larger gray zone in which we do see it feeding into the economy directly.
So this actually shows you the scale of the challenge for us. I mean, this border all the way up till there, and terrorism coming in through there because of actual support from the Taliban, the TTA. And then, of course, finally, when we had no option left. Pakistan launched
Yeah.
attacks against terror camps. Now, this is Afghanistan's map, and the area in green is where the terrorists are. They have their sanctuaries.
Absolutely.
And this is where we've attacked them.
So just to explain it, it's just adjacent to the map that the Pakistani
right.
map that we've left.
Got it.
And so you can connect the dot.
So just
This is-
visualize the heat map that we were showing
Exactly.
right here.
So this is where Chatral comes, and this is where Bajawad Mumand in Khyber is located, and this is where Kuram, as well as the North Waziristan and South Waziristan parts are there. And this is the area opposite Chaman, as well as our Noshki borders, and close to them is actually then Iran. But the problems over here and over there are actually equal concentration of several militant groups. And I won't just say terrorist entities, they're backers as well. One of the reasons that this has actually been such a tough terrain is that these are mountains that are over 9,800 above sea level. And so it's very difficult to man. The other bigger problem, Fahd Saab, is because we keep on hearing this, and it's a criticism coming in from the public generally who hasn't visited this area, is that how does Pakistan, even when it has a fence, hasn't been able to secure it? One of the major reasons is because this
Terrain?
it's the terrain, but secondly, you only have Pakistani forces guarding it. You've got non-state actors on the other side.
Which is probably the only border where only one side is blocking it.
And so it hasn't been able to shed the tag of being porous, even in the last 20 years. And so with the Taliban government, economically strangulated, but with agendas of expansionism, because they haven't let go the claim of the Durand Line. And so for every, conversation that actually is taking place, you tell them that there are the TTP in this part of the world, and they'll say that this border is not accepted, it's our area. And you tell them that, there's a humanitarian crisis, so they don't care about their population as well.
So basically, this is where we've attacked, this is where we are trying to hit them, but it is an ongoing issue, and the gravity of the situation is reflected in the next map, where you can actually see in this that this is the comparison of overall incidents of violence, 21 to 25. And I think the key thing, Iftikhar, which we need to tell our people is that it starts climbing from 2021. And this coincides directly with when the Taliban took over Kabul, and attacks in Pakistan begin to go up sharply.
Absolutely. So one of the reasons, and it's important to explain this, is that you do see Pakistan's efforts. And this could have happened much earlier, but Pakistan has engaged them in different ways. The diplomatic efforts plus the carrot and stick policy that we've been using. But till this point, there is some kind of diplomatic effort that is there.
Till here. Yeah.
But then you see a complete breakdown. And the more that Pakistan has been trying to go against terrorism, the Taliban have actually thought that they're going against them. Because in their strategic calculus, it's the non-state actors that are an integral part of the Taliban. This also is, by the way, if you look at it from a Pakistani perspective, this is the third spike that we see in terms of the last 3 decades. And you know the damages that the terrorism has done. So the first spike is in 2009, where you have about roughly 3,300 attacks. And then you have 2014, which is roughly between 1,200 and something. But now you see 2025, it has a 1,124.
So it's peaking.
It's peaking, and it's still growing. But what has happened is that in 2026, when Pakistan lost all hope that diplomacy is not working, and our forces were being targeted on daily basis, we've been picking up,
You can
borders.
show it here.
Yes,
this
you
is
can
where it
actually
is.
see it.
You can see these are the casualties in overall incidents of violence 2025.
Yes.
And you can see
It's
the numbers.
very clear. So this is the major chunk of the attack. And what it actually means is you see our military and police fatalities are the highest. One of the reasons is that they're actually trying to attack and break down social order. So in any place, in any district, whether it's Balochistan or KP, if there is a functional government, it's nearly impossible for the Taliban to exist. And so the first thing that they're trying to do is to weaken the state. And so the entity that actually exists for the state to impose itself, it's the armed forces. And then you see civilian casualties. Despite the fact that the claims are there that there are no civilian casualties and the terrorist propaganda particularly focuses This actually itself shows the large number of civilian casualties, and on everyday basis, we actually see several civilians being targeted, even in the Banu attack.
Yeah.
We talk about the casualties from the police's side, but there were actually 7 civilian casualties as well. And then you see the large number of militants killed as well, which actually...
This is a success of the law enforcement
It is the
agencies.
success of the law
Huge
enforcement. Absolutely. It shows that the efforts to stop these attacks haven't sort of been paused at any
But
point.
till the origin of these militants is not addressed, you know, the flow of terrorists will keep on coming. Let's go to the.
But it also shows that they don't lack any manpower. The Afghan Taliban are providing them consistent fuel for this war.
That's an important point. So let's go to the next one. In fact, if we can go to the main map, because I just want to now bring it back to where we started from. So now this is where we are. We have to now do something which brings us the kind of success that we are looking at, because contrast it with our diplomatic successes.
Sure.
Till we get control this scourge of terrorism, we won't be able to do everything that we need to do.
Absolutely.
We've done the February attacks, we've hit them. Right now things are kind of in a quiet phase.
Yeah.
What options do we have, finally looking at our geography here?
I think when you look at the geography, it tells a very different story altogether. And one of the main bones of contention, when you summarize all the data, is actually the Afghan Taliban, who are not ready to let go the proxies that they have at their disposal. And the TTP is just one part of it. The major escalation of attacks is actually because Afghanistan is becoming a sort of a transnational militant hub. And we see all sorts of terrorist organizations actually rearing their heads up at this point. And one of the most important factor, because it's Pakistan that's suffering in the short term, this is going to be a bigger problem for the world. Because now we see groups aligned with Al-Qaeda, which had previously been decimated or completely obliterated. Several of these entities had gone missing.
They're coming back?
They're all back. Even the attack that you mentioned in Banu is actually an Al-Qaeda-backed group, which openly has proclaimed allegiance to the Afghan Taliban.
So with the success that we have diplomatically with the mediation in Iran, with Iran and the USA, hopefully if things work out, we'll have more diplomatic weight. We should be able to leverage that to address this problem and tell the regional countries and everybody else, this is not just our problem. So there has to be a greater effort to sort out this, the sanctuary of terrorism, which is hurting us, but is going to hurt everybody.
I think that any analyst of terrorism who understands even the basics of this will not disagree with you that Pakistan requires the international leverage to resolve this problem without putting pressure within the Afghan Taliban, but more importantly, for entities globally that are actually sustaining this entity. Because if they are our partners and we are helping them to negotiate, we need to choke them economically. Secondly, Afghanistan needs to be now given back to people who are representative of Afghanistan. There's a larger population in Afghanistan, and people usually say that people in Afghanistan are not complaining. We always say that it's actually the graveyard silence in Afghanistan because they're not allowed to speak. The moment there is some sort of catalyst that appears here and Pakistan remains central to that, this problem is not going to go away anytime soon.
I think it's a very important point. Fahd, thank you very much
for
educating us and our views about this very important policy option for
us.
We will take a break here. When we come back, there'll be much more to come. So do stay with us. So given the present situation, it is very clear that President Donald Trump will be traveling to China this week with the war still unresolved. This creates all kinds of problems for him. And as I was referring to the article earlier, the article by Robert Kagan in The Atlantic, which is being talked about widely today on social media. Of course, those who know Mr. Kagan know very well that he has always supported American imperial wars, but this time he says that in Iran, the American might has been defeated, and this defeat will change the balance of power not only in the region but also in terms of American hegemony in the world. It's a very important article, and it says something which a lot of other people have been articulating, but no one who has been so vociferously pro-war. And therefore, of course, it is now going to add pressure on this whole perception of America's performance as narrated by Donald Trump and his administration. So where do things go now? And specifically, the very important strategic weapon that Iran has converted the Strait of Hormuz into. How will that work in favor of Iran, not just in terms of the conflict now, but once the conflict also ends? We are joined to discuss all this by Professor Michalis Kontos. He is a geopolitical and maritime security analyst, and he is an associate professor of international relations at the University of Nicosia in Cyprus. His work focuses on maritime power competition and great power rivalry, specifically in the Mediterranean region. Professor Kontos, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
So, as I was, Donald Trump is heading to China. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. The naval blockade by the US is still very much in place. Nothing seems to be changing. Is Iran buying more time, or are the Americans now realizing that time is not on their side?
What we can gather from open sources, I think what strikes me most is indeed the successful use of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran as a strategic weapon,
Yes.
which is, I think, something that nobody expected to happen with such efficiency and to be so much sustainable for such a prolonged period of time. Because Iran has threatened in the past to close the Strait of Hormuz, but it has never done so. This time it has done it, and it looks like the United States lacked sufficient answer to this challenge posed by Tehran. And it seems that right now for Washington, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz becomes the #1 priority in the context of this conflict. So by itself, this outlines a very important success for Iran because it has managed to utilize a card that wasn't existent at the beginning of the conflict.
Professor Kontos, what it also changes, and I'd like your comment on that, is this whole of the American military might, the American Navy being the guardian of international waterways. Now, in this conflict, it has become absolutely clear that the American Navy is in no position to actually force open the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, if the American Navy can't open it, probably there is no other navy in the world which can do that. So which means that now Iran has control over the Strait of Hormuz. It is using it as a weapon. It will continue to use it in the days or months or years to come also, which essentially means that this entire strategic landscape that we had in place, where one superpower ensured that certain rules of the waterways were in place, all that seems to be changing now, and countries with their own navies will now have to make their own rules for their own benefits.
Great power that exposed these trends, the trends of questioning waterways in contemporary world, was China, with the so-called Belt and Road Initiative that was launched, among other reasons, because China lacked control in critical waterways in the Straits of Malacca, or even the first islands chain in East Asia in its own proximity, because of the presence of powerful contingents of US Navy. So China chose to launch the Belt and Road Initiative in order to avoid reliance on these critical waterways. And it tried to use land corridors instead, or not instead, but in parallel with maritime corridors through the investments that it started funding in the frame of the Belt and Road Initiative, which now I think becomes a very much attractive approach for other countries as well. Because as you correctly said, if the United States, which has the most powerful navy in the world, by far the most powerful navy in the world, cannot safeguard the freedom of navigation through waterway, like the Strait of Hormuz, then who can do so? It's already a discussion in the broader Persian Gulf and Middle East whether the countries of the region should consider landways to transport their energy resources, maybe through Saudi Arabia, instead of maritime waterways. This is going to be, I think, let's not confine this discussion only to the Strait of Hormuz. Let's take it also to the Red Sea and the control that the Houthi regime has exercised in the waterways there throughout the preceding war in Gaza. So we are witnessing a critical shift in the way that states perceive and make use of critical waterways.
I think
so. Now maybe we will witness a shift towards land corridors in substitution of reliance on this critical waterway.
This article by Professor Robert Kagan, who's a columnist, he's also said that Iran will now use its control over the Strait of Hormuz, allow those countries who are on good terms with Iran, will impose heavy costs on those who are not on good terms, and therefore in some ways by doing this it will force most countries to strike arrangements with Iran and increasingly isolate Israel in the region. So these major dynamics are already underway.
One factor is how this conflict will end, whether it will continue, and how much a potential continuation of this conflict will weaken the involved parties, and which involved parties may benefit more from the continuation of this conflict. For Iran, for example, to be in a position to gain so much strategic foothold in the future through the prolonged and continuous use of the Strait of Hormuz as a leverage against other countries in the region will depend on whether Iran will continue being preoccupied with a conflict in its own country. And from what I have seen over the past few days in the exchange of messages between Tehran and Washington, it looks to me that for Iran, the priority right now is to coerce the Americans and the Israelis to stop fighting. It's using the Strait of Hormuz as a leverage to stop the war. The United States is also pretty much in a difficult position. The Trump administration cannot withstand a prolonged conflict of this kind, given the fact that we are having intermediate elections very soon. and there is a possibility that the Democrats win both chambers in the US Congress, and the ongoing conflict would favor
Absolutely.
this scenario. But we also need to consider that on the part of Israel, maybe the will to continue fighting will be there in the near future as well, regardless whether the United States may withdraw or may limit their commitment. I think that for Israel, there are existential stakes in place, and do not exclude the possibility that Israel may want to continue a form of strikes against Iran in the proceeding period of time. And this will judge a lot when it comes to the future of the leverage that all the involved parties will have in the region.
Absolutely. It's a good point. This will also factor in the meetings that take place between President Trump and President Xi in a couple of days. Thank you so much, Professor Michalis Kontos, for joining us from Nicosia in Cyprus. Sometimes the most important thing about an article is not the headline, it is the name underneath it. And that is why this piece by Robert Kagan matters so much. Now, for viewers who may not know him, Robert Kagan is not some critic of American power sitting outside the system. Quite the opposite. For more than 2 decades, he has been one of the loudest and most influential defenders of aggressive American global leadership. He was among the strongest intellectual supporters of the Iraq War. He consistently argued that the US must use military power to shape the world rather than simply react to it. In one of his most famous arguments, Kagan rejected the idea that diplomacy alone keeps the order in the world. He wrote, and I quote, "The United States uses force because it can. Europe uses diplomacy because it cannot." That sentence became famous in Washington foreign policy circles because it perfectly captured his worldview. Hard power matters. Military dominance matters. American strength keeps order. This is all he said. And after 9/11, Kagan strongly backed interventionist policies across the Middle East. During the Iraq War debate, he argued that American power had to be used decisively against hostile regimes and warned repeatedly that weaknesses or retreat would damage America's global credibility. So when someone with that background writes an article in the Atlantic magazine titled "Checkmate in Iran," people in Washington and elsewhere notice. Because when hawks start sounding pessimistic, it usually means something serious has changed. And the core argument of this article is indeed startling. Kagan is essentially saying that the US may already have lost this war strategically, even if it won many battles tactically. He writes, "Defeat for the United States is not only possible, but likely." That's an extraordinary sentence coming from a man who spent years arguing that American military superiority could shape global outcomes. America and Israel used massive force here in Iran. They struck military targets across Iran, damaged infrastructure, killed commanders, and still failed to achieve the main objective. Iran did not collapse. The regime survived. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested and closed. And Washington now looks trapped between escalation and retreat. Kagan's argument is that this is no longer a normal military problem, it is becoming a credibility problem. At one point he writes that the war has exposed an America that looks unreliable and incapable of finishing what it started. And that matters because superpowers depend not only on weapons but on perception. Countries follow power when they believe that power can impose outcomes. But when the world watches the strongest military on earth spend weeks attacking a regional power without forcing surrender, then allies begin asking questions and rivals begin drawing conclusions. Kagan believes the consequences go far beyond Iran. He argues that Gulf states may now begin adjusting themselves around Tehran rather than Washington. China and Russia gain influence, America's allies in Asia and Europe start questioning American staying power. And then he delivers a very important line. He says, if this isn't checkmate, it's close. That is not the language of confidence, that is the language of strategic exhaustion. Now, this does not mean that America suddenly disappears as a global power. Of course not. The US remains militarily and economically dominant in many ways, but Kagan's warning is about something deeper. He is saying the age of unquestioned American hegemony may be starting to crack, not in theory, in front of the world. And that is why this article really has made people notice. Not because a critic wrote it, but because someone who believed in American power, he wrote it. A man who spent much of his life arguing for American force is now openly warning that force has reached its limits. And when people like Robert Kagan begin talking about defeat, then perhaps the writing really is on the wall, not just for this war, but for an entire era.